otherwise I'd forget.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
No problem. Okay, so just a bit of a preamble. This is just one example of using ChatGPT. So many of you, I'm sure, have other examples. And so we want to keep lots of time for discussion at the end so we can really all learn from each other. And not only is this just one example, but it's one example of just using one AI site, which is ChatGPT. So what I've tried to do is copy and paste as much as possible and give details of what I did. And you'll see, hopefully this will be helpful. I'm going to go through the background and goals and what I did. But yes, as Allison mentioned, I tried to use it in my class. She gave me a good idea of what I could do, and I just kind of ran with it, sent an email to thank her, and now I'm doing a lunch and learn. So background, as she mentioned, I'm teaching a course at the Chang School in family business. It is asynchronous and it's virtual. So I do not meet with the students in person. I do not even meet with them on Zoom. We engage via emails, announcements, discussion boards, and the like. So there is a weekly discussion board. Normally, discussion boards are only open for 1 week. I kept this particular discussion board open for 2 weeks. Participation overall is worth 20% for the students, but it's over multiple weeks. So for one board, it's very low stakes, both for them and for me. So I was willing to try something new, and my goals were really to engage them on the course concepts and the subject matter, which is family business, but also for them to learn about the hazards of ChatGPT. I mentioned the limitations and benefits, but really want to focus on the limitations, and I wanted it to be fun. I think that it's important that our students learn the ins and outs of ChatGPT, especially before they do a lot of their final written assignments. So I figured it was a good time. So what did I do? I first had to test a lot of different potential prompts and responses on ChatGPT. So prompts are when you ask GPT, talk to me about this, or, explain something about this. I did a lot of different ones. There were a bunch that I didn't use. The ones that I liked, I copied and pasted onto a Word document. I really looked for ones that had deficiencies. I kept a few that I thought responses were pretty good, but I was really looking, as I said, to focus on teaching them about some of the hazards. So I was looking at responses that weren't quite as good. And then I took each of these prompts and responses, and I posted them as a new thread on a specific ChatGPT discussion board in my course shell. And what I did is I asked students to grade the response. And after 2 weeks, I posted my grades that I would have given each of the responses, and I compared it with the grades the students gave, and I explained my views on that. So what types of prompts did I use? Well, first I looked at my past discussion board questions. And a lot of the discussion boards, the way I've used them in my class is I really want the students to engage with each other because we are not meeting in person. So I wanted people to share their personal experiences, give their opinions. And they know that if they use a source, then that is a better post. But often they're sharing their opinions and personal experiences. When I asked ChatGPT various questions and I didn't force it to use a particular source, I found the responses were actually really good. And so I really wanted to get into more suboptimal responses. And so I was very clear with my wording then to incorporate specific course materials, like there are cases that we discussed in the course. Because this is a business course, we often use business cases which have a vignette of what goes on in a company, and there's specific characters trying to accomplish specific goals in the company. What should these characters do? I related it to specific chapters of our textbook. There was a 5-page synopsis, really an appendix of a book that was used for a prior discussion board. I related it to that. And there was also a short video we'd used in a prior discussion board. So I asked it to really look at these specific course materials. And I would say, for instance, what is a paradox that might have been seen in this specific case study, and how should the characters have addressed this paradox? I also played around with word length. I found 50 words was way too low. If I didn't give it a maximum word length, sometimes the answers were really long. So I tried to vary the word length. And so this is what the discussion board looked like. This is sort of copy and paste from my shell. The instructions for the students were, this board will help us all to explore ChatGPT and also family business concepts and have you be the instructor. So really that was my goal, right? They're exploring ChatGPT, I'm exploring ChatGPT. We're talking family business concepts and they are going to be the instructor. So it should be hopefully fun. And those of you who've used discussion boards know that it's really important to title your posts and replies very clearly so that you can see at a glance and not repeat what other people have done. And so I tell them in the title of their reply to put the letter grade, and then in the text of their reply to say why they assigned it that letter grade. So here's an example of a prompt and response that I put on the discussion board. And so the prompt relates to a logo of a family business advisor that I had given the students a couple of weeks prior. And it's a logo that has 6 planes flying in a formation. They resemble pieces of a puzzle, but there's one piece of the puzzle missing. And it's a metaphor that this specific family business advisor uses to explain what he does as a family business advisor. And I asked the students just to really test their understanding of what a family business advisor does. This is an example where I asked ChatGPT to comment on it, and it did a really good job, so much so that I sent this explanation to the specific family business advisor, and he loved it. So because, as I said, I was looking for examples where I thought ChatGPT did not do a great job, it won't surprise you that the grades that I gave were pretty low for many of the responses. So this is a hard to read chart, I know. Each column represents a specific question that I put in as a new thread in ChatGPT in the discussion board. So there's numbers 1 through 16. So there are 16 different responses that I put in. And the letter grades correspond to those little yellow boxes. And you'll notice that the first 2 I thought were pretty good answers, and I graded them as such. The next couple of ones, columns 3 and 4, I thought had very limited family business concepts incorporated in them. And then the next few I explain in the next few slides why I thought they were very generic or had old information or errors or hallucinated. And I'll get into hallucinations. I'm going to show you the student grades, but I'm guessing you can probably all assume that the student grades were perhaps a little bit better than mine. They were quite a bit better than mine. The students really seemed quite swayed by the professional sounding responses. And there were a few things that I thought were interesting. For one, the students that gave lower grades on some of the responses, so you see here, there's like some C's. It didn't surprise me that the students who gave the low grades, that those were the students who did it based on the work they had done before and their thoughtfulness in the work they had done before, which made me think that, this might be a pretty good way to assess students. As well, it didn't surprise me that the students gave really positive responses mostly. And it taught me that, I guess it helped me to explain to students that, hey, if you recognize that the response is generic and doesn't really relate to the materials, and a lot of these students did say that in this, in questions 5, 6, and 7, why would you think it's going to get a great grade if the question is specifically asking you to relate it to the specific case? So hopefully it helped them understand not just ChatGPT, but really how instructors grade. So maybe there was a bit of a side benefit there. So what did ChatGPT do well? I talked about the question about the significance of the family business advisor logo. There was a philosophical question about should someone who's not active in a family business own shares? And it did a pretty good job on that. I would have wanted for a great response to also include something we call dual class shares and voting rights, et cetera. But it wasn't bad. There was another question about a quote assigned to someone named Peter Drucker about culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I wanted them to put that into a family business context. And I think with that one, it wasn't great because there wasn't a lot of family business context, But my sense is if someone would have chatted more with ChatGPT, which is something that if you want to get a better response, you probably should do, it would have given a better grade had there been more back and forth, but that is not what I did. So that's why it wasn't a great grade. So what did ChatGPT not do well? As I mentioned, some of the responses were very generic. So in this case, I said there was an assignment that the students had done on a specific case, and there were two cousins in this case, and they were trying to make family meetings more productive and use them as a way to have more family unity and family consensus. And I said, what should these characters have done to improve family meetings? And ChatGPT came back with something about, well, it's important to have an agenda and send an agenda in advance, keep to your time schedule. Is it like, yes, it's nice things you should do for meetings, but it wasn't relevant to the case. It was very generic. Also something about how to professionalize the company to take it to the next level and do so as a family. And again, it was just very generic. Another thing that it did with some of the questions is it omitted key points since they occurred recently. Now, what I'm learning about is that there are some different AI platforms which do take into account more recent events, but ChatGPT, or at least the version that I used and the version that I think is out as of last week, does not take into account some more recent events. So I asked it about a family business that is a role model for corporate social responsibility, and good answer, talked about Patagonia, which is a great example, but it didn't talk about the fact that the owners donated all their shares to charity, which is groundbreaking and a key point if you're going to talk about CSR and Patagonia. It also, I asked it about a specific competitive advantage from a family business perspective on a company that has a legacy baking division. And what it did is it focused on this legacy baking, but it didn't realize that this actual company had sold its baking division. So it didn't make sense. And then I'm going to give you examples of hallucinations. And this is where ChatGPT fabricates stuff which does not exist. And it did this typically when it was trying to respond about a specific case study or specific source. So what are some examples of hallucinations that it did? Well, one of them, which I thought was pretty amusing, is I referred to a specific framework from an academic paper about socio-emotional wealth, and the authors created an acronym, FIBRE, where all you need to know right now is that R stands for renewal of family relationships, but ChatGPT referred to it and used R as relationships with suppliers and customers, which was just wrong. I asked it to refer to, I mentioned like an appendix of a book, and this book had 50 key lessons, and the prompt was very specific to choose a specific numbered lesson, which it avoided in the response. But the description of a lesson that it provided didn't match any of the 50 lessons that were out there. It made a compelling point, but it didn't match. And then one of the ones that I thought was really interesting was it referred, I asked, the question was to refer to a Berkshire Hathaway shareholders letter. So Warren Buffett does this shareholder letter every year. It's a great example of shareholder communication. And I wanted the students and ChatGPT to choose a specific portion of that letter and think about how they might incorporate that into family business communication. And it came back with, I know this is very hard to read, but a response where it talked about a specific quote. It says example from shareholders letter, and it goes on this whole thing in quotes, and it says it was from page 3 of the letter. I looked at the past 7 years of letters. There is no quote that looks like this. What it talked about is something that Warren Buffett, it doesn't misalign with views of Warren Buffett from what I've read, but this specific quote does not exist. I Googled the portions of the quote. It's not there. So these are examples of things that were fabricated. So what I did at the end of the 2 weeks is I posted an announcement in my class, which is how I communicate with the students. And the key points were basically, it was, I thought, a fascinating week. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. I explained that there were hallucinations, what hallucinations were. I gave them examples from some of the 16 responses that we had. I reminded them that instructors know the cases really well. So it is very obvious to us if information is made up. I talked about recent events being omitted. I gave examples of that. I talked about why these specific responses were generic and why generic responses do not get high grades. I gave them a chart, one that you've seen with the comparison of my grades and their grades, but I also gave them an Excel table, which I'll show to you in a minute. It's just hard to see on Zoom. And really, I said, you have to be really careful if you're using ChatGPT, because the responses sound impressive, but portions of the responses can be made up or hallucinated if they're being tied to specific sources. And if you're being asked to tie a concept into a case or a text or an article, you really have to do that yourself, since ChatGPT can't do it right now. And it just makes stuff up, or it gives you generic examples. And it's not what an instructor is looking for. If something has happened in the recent past, it probably also won't be in there. So you really have to, you cannot rely on ChatGPT. And hopefully, it's one thing to just tell them that, but hopefully by experiencing this over these 2 weeks and seeing how they kind of got duped by ChatGPT, that'll help them to understand it. What I also did is I posted in each thread of the discussion board a more detailed rationale of my grade, so to really explain it. So this is what I said. I did this Excel chart overview where the column on the left is just the title of the topic, their grades, my grades, and my rationale for why I chose the grade. What I realized is discussion boards don't have numbers, so it's hard to refer to any question by number because the order of them really gets moved around. And this is an example of a reply that I put in. So the board was closed Friday night, and so Saturday morning, I put in a whole bunch of replies. This one related to a paradox for a specific family business, to our textbook. And what I noticed is ChatGPT referred to a paradox, never said where it was in the textbook. I did find, it talked about interdependence. I found this in our textbook in chapter 6, but it wasn't used in the way that ChatGPT described in the response. And so while the prescription part of the response was actually pretty good and pretty sound, the textbook reference, which was really integral to the question, wasn't just vague, it was fabricated. So I started to think about, well, what were my takeaways? Like, what did this exercise make me realize? And I realized that specific questions are really tougher for ChatGPT to do well. And open-ended questions can be handled really well, but when they're linked to specific sources or recent events, ChatGPT does not handle them well. I realized that the good students were very easily, fooled or swayed by ChatGPT, but students who gave it a little bit more thought weren't as swayed. And so it really could be an interesting way to assess students. And this could be done via an assignment or on a class exam. It could be done virtually. It could be done in person. And it also made me realize that ChatGPT does do some things really well, but we really need to help our students understand the hazards of relying on it. And I know that the message at TMU is really, it's up to each of us, up to each individual instructor to decide how or if we want students to use ChatGPT. And again, the takeaways for students are pretty similar to what I wrote in my announcement, but I think there really is something about form over substance, and they have to realize that substance matters. ChatGPT does help with form, but it doesn't get at some of the substance issues. And generic responses are not going to get good grades if you're asking about specific sources. And if I have graded an assignment which is focused on a specific case and done that hundreds of times, I know that source inside out, and they have to use the source. They cannot rely on ChatGPT. So there's a lot of hazards, and each class is a unique context. So this is my last slide. So how can how could I improve, or how could this be modified? For me, some of the things that I learned, if I was doing this on a discussion board format, again, I would leave time to ask students to reflect on the disparity between the grades I gave and the grades they gave, but I really had to move on in participation and the activities for the class, so I couldn't do that. I'd probably have a maximum number of students respond to the same entry. There was a couple of clusters. And because I usually give my students options of how they want to engage, I give them more than one discussion board every week. And I think for this one, I wouldn't, because there are so many different types of questions that were there that everyone could have found something they wanted to talk about. Moving away from just a discussion board format, if I was doing in-class discussions, I could really see groups working on this in class and then having the groups come back and say, hey, our group gave this a B, our group gave it a C, and discussing it. I think you could, I was reading, I guess, a university in England, an instructor there was talking about how they used multiple versions of a response, and they asked students to critique or annotate the one they felt was best, and that was an assignment, and that looked pretty interesting. And I guess if we really wanted to focus on ChatGPT learning, and I was focused also on my course concepts and I was doing this online, you could ask students to use ChatGPT once it gets the initial response to create better responses, right? So you engage more with ChatGPT, you actually chat with it, and you tweak out and improve the response that it gave you. I know my kids are really good at doing that, and that's apparently how they use it, and that's how a lot of people are using it. And that's one thing that I didn't get into with this exercise. And so then the next point is, question marks, so that we can discuss how, other ways of leveraging ChatGPT.